Hello. This news story is a couple of days later than intended because, well, my ongoing, how can I put it, argument with brain cancer slowed me down for a while. More on my ongoing battle with this shitty disease at the end of this news story, since a lot of you have been very kind and supportive with your comments, and I feel I owe you some kind of update. I should have done one long ago, to be fair. I just don't find it the easiest thing to talk about. Anyway, enough of that rubbish. On with the interesting, important stuff, which is obviously the latest bike news. And this time I'm talking BMW and one of my favourite models of the past few years. I'm referring to a bike that came out in 2015, so nearly, 8 or 9 years ago now. Wow, time definitely seems to accelerate the older you get. But since I first rode it back in 2015, I've been fortunate enough to spend time with it on several memorable occasions since, in Austria, Bavaria a couple of times, South Africa and also Spain. I'm a huge fan of its combination of 165 horsepower superbike thrills with a set of adventure bike ergonomics that mean you can realistically use your superbike for touring as well as track days. Sure, if track days are your primary focus, as they were for me when I was a younger man, well, up until my early 40s when I was still doing some relatively serious racing, then you'll want the more hardcore, track-ready R. But if you want just one bike to fulfill multiple road bike roles in your life, touring, commuting maybe, carrying a passenger, and still being scarily fast enough to provide all the adrenaline you can reasonably handle, then the XR is your bike. I feel like I may have inadvertently made it sound like an old man's bike, but nothing could be further from the truth. It might be, in a way, I suppose, but that's just because us older riders are also wiser riders, and we have realised after 1,000,000+ kilometres of road riding that there's no need really to sacrifice comfort in the name of speed. It would take some kind of professional road racer on a S1000 XR to gap a good rider on an XR on an unfamiliar mountain pass, where in truth even the bravest racer can't fully exploit the performance that the XR can offer. So it's a comfortable superbike for old farts, I can hear you muttering to yourself. And I suppose as an old fart myself, I can't really argue too much, can I? So instead of continuing with my futile build-up to the updated model, let me rather, at last, just get on with some details. The most significant of those details, given all of my previous performance pontificating, has to be the engine update that has increased the previous 165 horsepower peak to 170, the equal of its most obvious competitor, the Ducati Multistrada V4. And I suppose if that bike, which still retains at least some ability to tackle the occasional bit of not too demanding off-roading, is a genuine competitor, then the similarly capable 1290 Super Adventure S and its 160 horsepower V-twin is also in the mix. Anyway, horsepower aside for the moment, the rest of the improvements to the XR are very subtle, with the seat now wider and more comfortable, as well as 10mm further from the ground. There's a change of colours, some different textures on some of the bodywork, and you can spec some M division items like the wheels and seat if you wish. Perhaps the best news, apart from the 5 horsepower engine gain in what is ultimately a very mild update, is that the Headlight Pro, keyless ride and USB charging port options are all now part of the standard package. Right. Now that's dealt with, we can move on to the really big news for the XR, which is the creation of an entirely new model, the M1000 XR. After the M1000 XR Superbike and then the naked M1000 Single R, we have a third model in the M Sport range in the shape of the XR. Like the standard S1000 XR, the headline, but written much larger and bolder this time, is all about the engine. The MXR gets the shift cam version of the inline 4-cylinder engine, and that means this adventure sports tourer has a legitimately bonkers 201 horsepower at its disposal. Just like the M1000 naked bike, there's some shortened gearing to take full advantage in terms of acceleration instead of outright top speed, although you're not exactly going to suffer in that respect either, because you'll still be able to exceed 270 k's an hour before it starts to run out of steam. I'm sure that will satisfy most sport touring riders. I must admit, I am enjoying seeing this new range of M bikes, and in the case of the naked and adventure sport models, the totally unnecessary and more than slightly ridiculous levels of power and performance that they offer. It was only about 2 or 3 years ago, when the S1000 was last updated, that my inquiry about the possibility of a more powerful version still to compete with the likes of Ducati, KTM, Triumph and Aprilia's Super Nakeds that were boasting outputs of between 175 and 205 horsepower was met with a response that suggested I was, which I am, an uneducated bore for asking for more, because 165 was, well, more than enough. And anyway, it's a naked bike and was tuned for real-world usability, where it apparently more than matched, in fact actually exceeded many of its main rivals. I tried to make this very pragmatic person understand my point that despite him undoubtedly being correct about the usability, he might actually be missing some of the passion and illogical desire that extreme performance machines can exert over us red-blooded petrol heads. These things don't actually need to make any sense. Riders don't necessarily need to have the skills to fully exploit these incredible pieces of engineering. But just ask any flabby hypercar-owning middle-aged man in his €500,000 Ferrari, simply cruising at legal speeds and being seen in his Italian stallion, more than justifies the price he's paid for his little slice of reflected glory. Right, apart from 201 horsepower out of an engine that will happily scream a shade past 14,500 RPM, what else does your M money get you? Well, everything you'd expect really, from the chassis to the bodywork to the electronics. Everything that could be added has been added. There's too much to go into everything now, so let's just mention the main stuff like the electronically controlled suspension, the M Sport brake calipers in a fetching blue, and of course the obligatory aero wings that add 12 kilos of downforce at 220 kilometers an hour. The list of electronic rider aids is, well, it's mind-boggling, and if you want to take a closer look, then head over to the BMW website. Otherwise I'm going to need to change the memory card in this camera to have space enough to cover everything. Suffice it to say, everything is basically included, from setting a pit lane speed limiter to hill hold control. Although it may sound like absolutely everything is standard fitment in this most special of XRs, you can actually spend more than the basic price of about 520,000 Rand, or a bit under 27,000 euros, by opting for the M competition package that gets you a special paint job, lots of carbon fibre, including a set of wheels, and a M seat. And then you'll be in for about 630,000 Rand. Sounds like a lot of money, and of course it is, but the rarefied atmosphere in which this bike is flying, it actually seems quite reasonable to me, especially when Ducati's less powerful RS Multistrada V4 is going for an extra 100,000 Rand or so. Okay, let's get something a bit more affordable from BMW Motorrad now, though hardly cheap. I'm talking about 15,000 Rand or so, 700 odd euros for a pair of sunglasses that also come with interchangeable clear lenses. The price might seem a touch more palatable when I tell you that they are connected via BMW's Rider app to give you a heads-up display on the right lens, I think it is, that'll keep you informed about your speed, the current speed limit, and some useful navigation info. Yes, very useful overall, possibly, but I'll try and borrow a pair the next time I get a BMW test bike to see if it's genuinely useful or just plain old irritating. Right, that's it for the bike news, and now I've finally got to the end of my BMW waffle. I've got plenty more to write up regarding Yamaha and Triumph and the new single-cylinder hypermotard from Ducati. But before I get on with that, I promised you an update on my health situation. And if you don't want to listen to this, fine, I recommend just stopping the video now. Some regular viewers will have noticed that I haven't ridden any bikes for the channel for the past 5 months or so. The biggest gap in my bike riding life for 30 plus years, by the way. Or you may have wondered why I seem to have been inflating and deflating around the face and neck quite so much. Steroids is the answer, but not the sort, unfortunately, that give you muscles. I have previously mentioned, briefly, once or twice, that I was diagnosed with brain cancer at the beginning of June. The comments of support that I received after those brief mentions blew me away. I was stunned, literally stunned by the level of support and kindness shown by so many of you. And I can never really truly express my gratitude and appreciation for how valuable I found those generous words during what were some truly desperate, dark times. Anyway, the diagnosis was advanced brain cancer. 8 tumours, several of them very large, massive migraines, brain scan, off to the specialist brain surgeon who said I needed risky surgery to remove the biggest tumour or otherwise I'd be dead in a matter of weeks. Between the diagnosis and going back to hospital for the op, a week or so later, I lost the ability to walk or use my hands properly. My speech was beginning to slur. I was becoming disoriented and not understanding basic things about how the world worked, as the pressure from the biggest tumour was causing lots of problems and the degeneration was happening very quickly. I thought, as did my wife and sister who had come to stay with me and help out, that I wasn't long for this world. Emotional times, saying goodbye to family and friends, making plans with Jax, my wife, about what she would do when I was gone, coming to terms with my own impending demise. The surgery and the few days before and after it were horrendous. I've had 19 broken bones from bike riding and about 7 or 8 operations to pin and screw them together again. Experienced open heart surgery to fit a mechanical aortic valve. Yet nothing prepared me for the pain and stress of this brain operation. Disorientation, soiling myself regularly for a few days, number ones and number twos, not knowing who or where I was, escaping my hospital room and pulling all the wires and drips out twice, collapsing in the corridor covered in my own shit and piss and plenty of blood, all my dignity stripped away. It was horrible. And yet, about 3 days after the op, after being told to maybe expect, if I was lucky, to regain a little bit of movement on my left side, I was able to walk unaided around the hospital ward. Borderline miraculous, really, and I'm really not a religious man. I started immunotherapy to try and shrink the remaining tumours, or at least slow their growth, but it didn't work. The side effects ruined my stomach and gave me, they think, possibly colitis. I ended up back in hospital for a few more weeks shortly after getting out, which was a bit of a crushing blow. Massive amounts of steroids ensued to control the stomach problems and reduce the swelling in my brain, which had been caused by the tumours. And they were giving me a huge amount of head pain and making me far too fond of morphine and OxyContin and stuff like that. They then put me on a new treatment plan called targeted therapy that involves me taking pills in the morning and evening every day now for as long as I'm going to live. The idea is to hopefully extend my life by some useful months, but as they always say, no guarantees. I went away with Jax in our van to Normandy, spent some quality time with her and my parents, and then came back for a brain scan to see if the new therapy was working. It certainly felt like it was. No head pains anymore, gradually getting stronger. Side effects like the fevers, dysentery, rashes and impaired vision getting easier to handle. The news was good. 4 months since diagnosis, for about 3 months of which I'd been bedbound in hospital or at home, the 7 remaining tumours had all shrunk quite significantly. What a jammy bastard. It's now 5 months since that diagnosis. I'm feeling stronger than ever and walking my dog Obi about 10 to 12 k's every day, driving the car again, and I'm about ready to start riding my bike once more, if Jax will let me. My next scan is on December 20th, and hopefully the news will be positive once again. There are no guarantees, obviously. The drugs can stop working, they act differently for each individual. I may get an extra 6 months, I may get 18 months. 20% of people on this medication are still alive at 5 years. So obviously I'm hoping for enough luck to be in that 20%. People ask me what I'm going to do with any extra time I get, and I tell them I want to do exactly what I would be doing if I didn't have this bloody disease. Work. Because my work is my passion. It's bikes and brilliant roads, and nothing gives me more pleasure than travelling and riding with Jax in wonderful locations and combining that with the videoing that we do so I can share it all with you lot. On which note, let me just add that I will be starting a new, more personal vlog on the channel about how we travel so cheaply in our old van to get these stories. A little peek behind the scenes, if you will. No worries if you don't want to watch these occasional vlogs, please just keep coming back for the dedicated bike stuff. These travel type pieces are in response to queries from family and mates who wonder how we manage to travel so far and so wide, knowing as they do that we're not exactly rolling in money. We've had lots of similar questions over the past years from plenty of you viewers as well, so hopefully the vlogs will help answer those questions and they'll allow me to keep you abreast of my health situation, share and receive advice and help from others who may have experienced cancer or other life-shortening illnesses. I'm well up for any help I can get on the psychological aspect of this journey, that's for sure. That's it for now. I'll be back in the next couple of days with plenty more news stories as the EICMA Expo gets ready to kick off. And thank you, really a heartfelt thank you from Jax and myself for all the wonderfully supportive comments you made when we first hinted at what was going on. I had to get Jax to read them to me in the beginning because whenever I tried to do it myself, I just burst into tears and basically fell apart a bit. So thanks again, everybody. Hopefully I get lucky and keep on keeping on for some time to come and can repay you with some interesting bike tests, amazing roads and museums and locations and scenes and well, just more bike show. Cheers for now.